Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about NikkieTutorials' recent video in which she shared that she is transgender. And primarily I want to focus on the response that I've seen to that video. And there are two tweets in particular that I'm going to be sharing with you and breaking down and just analyzing. Before we get to that, however, I want to just sort of set out the roadmap of how, at this moment in time, I intend to address the topics that I want to address. Because I had tweeted out yesterday saying, I want to do this video, but I fear it's just going to be me like swearing incoherently at the camera. Because at that point, I just had the urge to do a response video, but everything was just sort of swirling in my head, and I wasn't informed enough on the topic to feel confident to sit down to speak about it. So since then, I have sat down and done research, not extensive, not thorough. I'm going to give a brief overview, but I needed to learn more for my own sake so that I could then portray my feelings more coherently to you. So I don't want to claim that I'm an expert, that I'm in the know, that I have all the answers. I most certainly do not, but I certainly know more now than I did a day ago. And that's kind of, before I really dive into anything, that just shows you how easy it is for us to educate ourselves on things that we don't necessarily know about. We live in a world where information is literally at our fingertips, pretty much constantly. So when we don't understand something or when we don't know about something, it's very easy to find the answers, or it's very easy to at least inform ourselves on the topic so that we can make informed decisions and informed positions, or take informed positions on certain topics that arise. Okay, that was a sidebar that I was not anticipating doing. So back to the roadmap. What I'm going to do first is just talk about the terms that are at play here. So terms such as transgender, transsexual, transvestite, and just really kind of give an overview of what those terms actually mean and what the distinction is between them. I'm also briefly going to talk about the medical aspects, or at least how it's treated in medical literature, and then we're going to move on to the two tweets that kind of just put a bee in my bonnet. One of them is actually a comment to somebody else's YouTube video. I believe it was the Nosy Hausfrau's video. She is the one who posted the screenshot of it, so I believe it was a response to her video, but I'm going to share that on screen and you will see it. As well, there is another tweet from somebody who has received such negative attention from her tweet that she has deleted her Twitter account as well as her YouTube account. So I'm going to share those, and then I have at least 10 points to talk about in terms of the analysis of those two responses. And the reason that I'm focusing only on two is simply because there are so many. And there are responses that I've seen that are just simply just ignorant, just useless comments such as "that's gross." Like, I am not going to waste my time addressing something like that, and I'm not going to waste your time listening to me address something like that, because I think we can all agree it's just a pointless, bigoted comment to make. So I think that these two tweets in particular kind of express what this major response has been. So I don't want to say the major response, because the vast majority of people are supportive of NikkieTutorials, and that is wonderful to see. I think her video, as of the time that I'm filming it, has had 31 million views, and of those 31 million views, if I can bring it up quickly, she has received 340,000 comments, 2.7 million thumbs up, excuse me, and 118,000 thumbs down. So proportionately, there are far more supporters than they are detractors. But I think that from the responses that I have read until my blood pressure was at a point where I just couldn't read anymore, these two that I'm going to be analyzing and discussing, they sort of represent the masses. All right, so it's an extensive intro, but I wanted to provide that roadmap just so that you kind of have an idea of what to expect. Most of my content is lighthearted. I rely very heavily on sarcasm. I swear a lot. However, I think that this is the kind of topic that is so important that I want to take a more professional approach to it. I just want to give this the dignity and the respect that it deserves. So, having said that, let's start with the terminology. And the first word, of course, would be transgender. And what does that mean? What does it entail? Now, transgender really has more of a psychological component to it. So it's talking about more so the gender identity of a person or the gender expression of that person, and is not tied to their physical state of being or the sex that they are assigned at birth, whether that be male or female, based on their biology. Transgender is really sort of an umbrella term. So it does cover transsexual, and it also does cover cross-dressing. So people who are cross-dressers were previously referred to as transvestite. Now, depending on who you ask, transvestite may be an offensive term. As somebody who is not a cross-dresser and who is not transgender, it is not for me to determine whether or not that term is offensive. But I have read articles where some people who do engage in the act of cross-dressing feel that it's a completely acceptable term, and it's almost like they're reclaiming the term and taking ownership of it. Whereas there are people who do find it to be very offensive and derogatory and shy away from that kind of terminology. What I found interesting was that some of the people who do accept the term transvestite as being appropriate and acceptable do not accept the term tranny. It is much more widely known to be a derogatory term. So when we think about these words, it's important to keep in mind that words matter. And like I said, it's not for me to determine whether or not it's offensive, knowing that a subset, at least, of people who engage in cross-dressing believe it to be derogatory is all that I need to know to accept that this is not a term that I should be using. So I would stick with cross-dressing as a more accepted and more appropriate term. Now, switching gears from there, let's talk about what it means to be transsexual. But this deals more specifically with the physical anatomy, and this talks about people who undergo the transformative surgeries that are available. So whether they are changing their anatomy from male to female or vice versa. And not every transgender person does go through that, whether that's for personal decisions, health and safety risks, financial aspects, whatever the case may be. So in its very, very basic terms, when we say transsexual, we mean physical. When we say transgender, we mean gender expression, or the more psychological side of it. Now, having touched on psychological, let's move over to the medical side of things. So transgender is housed within the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's not labeled as transgender, it is now called gender dysphoria. That change did not take place until 2012. Up until that point, it was referred to as gender identity disorder. So we're seeing in 2012 this move away from viewing this as a disorder to labeling it as something that just shows what the shift in thinking is towards it. No longer is it a disorder, it's just a state of being. And dysphoria is not a word that is in common usage. It's not something that I think everybody is really familiar with. So rather than define that word, I'm going to talk about its opposite, because this is a word that I think most people are familiar with, and that is euphoria. So if we think of being euphoric, we're at basically the happiest state of being that we can be in. It's equivalent to bliss. So everything is as it should be, and we are happy and we are accepting of everything that is going on. And I think looking at the opposite really helps us to inform what dysphoria is. So everything that makes us euphoric, look at the opposite, and that is dysphoria. So there is this distress being caused to people who are transgender because their state of being, their emotional feeling of gender or their gender expression is at odds with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and that is creating this feeling of angst and upset and disconnect within their own bodies. It's not something that I can necessarily draw an analogy to in my own life because I have not experienced that, but I can understand the emotion behind it, even if I've never had that same feeling specifically. So it comes down to empathy, really, and just sort of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes to understand what that feeling might be like on the inside. Now, there are no set answers as to what causes somebody to feel this gender dysphoria, but there has been research done on it. And I'm just going to refer to my notes because I don't want to miss anything, but the research suggests that biological factors such as prenatal hormone levels and genetics may contribute to a transgender identity. And likewise, and the article that I read lumped early childhood experiences in as a biological factor, but I would argue that childhood experiences are not biological. Those are more of like the nature versus nurture kind of thing. But early childhood experiences can also play a role in whether or not somebody has a transgender identity. So it's not clear cut. There's no predicting. There's no test that we can take or any sort of diagnostic tools that we can use. It just is what it is. So this is still an emerging field of study, if you will. And if we look back to the DSM again, and I don't know what number it was in 1973, but that was the year that they removed homosexuality as a mental disorder. And that is nearly 50 years ago, and we are still not at a place in the world where homosexuality is just widely accepted, that it's universally accepted. So I have to have sympathy and I have to have respect for people such as NikkieTutorials and vast numbers of others who have shared their truth regarding their transgender identity, because we are not at a place where there is a lot of information about it or where people are ready to accept that, and the tweets that I'm going to share are going to show that. Because if we think of how long ago there was this change regarding homosexuality, gender dysphoria only replaced gender identity disorder 8 years ago. So we still have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm hoping that this video will at least help to inform anybody who views it just basic information regarding what it is to be transgender. So now we've come to the point where I'm going to put up the screenshots, and I'm going to read the tweets to you. As lengthy, particularly as the first one is, I'm going to read it simply in case anybody is watching this in the background or just doesn't want to read it. The font is very small, so I am going to read it, but I have removed their names. Now, typically speaking, I'm not in favor of hiding the identity of people who leave these kind of comments on the internet for all to see. Because if they don't feel concerned enough about hiding their own name as they post them, why should I go ahead and give them that benefit afterwards? However, in this situation, I don't want to detract from the central message. I don't want people to find these people out or hunt them down or leave them nasty comments or anything like that. I want to stay focused on the issue at hand. And the issue is not these people in specific, more so what it is that their points of view represent. And like I said earlier, I have chosen these two because they seem to sort of represent a larger group of people. So it's not about them, it's about the thoughts that they are portraying and sharing. So that's why I've done that. Anyways, here we go. So the first comment, this is the one that was the response to a YouTube video. It states, "No one is quote unquote born in the wrong body. It's all crap for people to keep saying this. Bottom line is being gay, quote unquote transgender, whatever people want to call it, is a choice, period. God made us and he doesn't make mistakes. Society has accepted and given passes for way too much BS. I believe that people can make whatever choices they want, and I do not judge people for their choices. However, it is just that, a choice. So many people make up all this crap to try and make things acceptable by society, like the word transgender. You're a male or a female who had plastic surgery. We do not create a name for that to make it acceptable by society and shove it down others' throats. People do need to know when they are being lied to. When someone says they are a woman, they were born with a vagina and hormones and vice versa. This is all BS, and just because you're a male that likes makeup or dressing up, or because you're physically or mentally attracted to the same sex, does not mean you need to go get your parts chopped up and tell others you're something else. What Nikki did was deceive her boyfriend, subscribers, and people whom thought they knew her. This only clarifies that no one can be trusted and that you never know someone truly. What she did also has gotten other quote-unquote transgenders murdered, beaten, etc. for deceiving straight people in which you have sexual and emotional interactions with, and whom are straight and want to be with God-made females and not physically created females. I have watched Nikki's videos for years, and yes, I believe that he/she has the right to be sexually and emotionally attracted to whom he/she wants to be, but do not deceive people in the process. She gained her subscribers, business deals, finance and financial gain off making people think she was born a female, and I don't find that right at all. It should have been something that was stated from the get-go. If transgender people don't think there's anything wrong with it, why do they hide it? Just be 100% with people, because in the end, that can make or break you. I do not agree at all with how this all went down, and I feel betrayed as a subscriber, and others should be also. It only proves how competent she is in lying and deceiving others. There are some very strong feelings housed in that response, and I am going to break it down. But first, I want to find the other tweet. So this one states, quote unquote, she is not a real woman. A real woman was born female. A real woman may or may not choose to have kids. A real woman might have infertility issues. A real woman does not deceive others. I still love Nikki, but I was deeply hurt when she said that she is a real woman. Now, the same person went on to post a response in the face of criticism that she received on that tweet and stated, as I said before, I still love Nikki, but I cannot watch her anymore. How can I continue to watch and support someone who has lied to so many? I understand why she didn't want to say anything. She was scared, and that's okay and very understandable. She also states, but I felt like as a woman I had been slapped in the face. So Nikki, I do love you and will always love you, but I cannot support you anymore. I do not wish to spread hate or anything. I'm just one of few people who want to kindly say my piece. The final tweet that I saw from this person states, I still believe what I believe, but should not have directed it towards Nikki. I don't know her and she doesn't know me. I do not mean to hurt anyone. I'm sure Nikki has already been through so much in her life growing up. And I'm just going to quickly respond to that particular point, particularly in I still believe what I believe, but should not have directed it towards Nikki. That is not an apology, and I don't think she necessarily meant it as an apology, to be honest. But whether you direct it at NikkieTutorials or whether you direct it at Joe who lives down the street, it doesn't matter. The feeling is still there, and the feeling applies to anybody who is transgender. All right. So now that I've read those, perhaps you understand why I felt so fired up. But I want to do like a rational sort of approach to this, and I really kind of want to break down some of those central themes. And as I said at the beginning, this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list. And again, that's why we have the comment section down below, so that if you disagree with me or if I've missed something that you think is really pertinent to the conversation, feel free to put it down there. Before I move on to my analysis though, I am going to say that I will be watching the comment section on this video with a hawk eye. I'm not one typically to delete tweets, but this is the kind of topic that seems to bring the worst out of some people, and thankfully it seems to be the minority. And I don't know that I'll receive any negative comments on here, but I don't want to see negative comments aimed at me, and I certainly don't want to see negative comments aimed at other people who are leaving comments. So rational people can disagree. Rational people can have differences of opinions, but we are going to be respectful of each other when expressing those differences of opinions, or I'll delete it. Full stop. All right. I have identified 10 things in specific that I want to touch on, and some of them I'm going to spend more time on than others. And really I'm starting with the first tweet or the first message that I read and then finishing up with the second, but there is overlap between the two, and where there is I will try to identify it, but just keep in mind you could really just combine the two of them together, and I'm just addressing the entire sort of feeling that seems to be evoked in some people regarding this. All right. So first up, I just want to address the use of quotations around things like the word she or transgender or transgenders. It's such condescending and rude behavior. It's completely unnecessary. We don't need to use quotations around the word she or around the word transgender, because these are actual words. Being transgender is an actual thing, so we don't need to put it into quotations. It's not anything that's being made up or a label that's just being created by one person. It's a well-known state of being, so it is what it is. And when people are a transgender woman, using the pronoun she is completely acceptable. We do not need to be putting quotations around it, nor do we need to be saying he/she. I didn't come across in my research whether or not the use of he/she is offensive, but I don't really feel like I needed to in order to know instinctually that it is. When you are transgender, your gender expression, your gender identity, what you feel on the inside does not coincide with the sex that was assigned to you at birth. Therefore, If you live your life as a woman, if you feel you are a woman, if you express yourself as a woman, then the pronoun she applies. You are not a combination of the two. You live your life as one or the other, and that pronoun applies to you. I'm going to err on the side of caution on this one and assume, particularly in the case of NikkieTutorials, because she is the catalyst in this video, she identifies as a she, as a woman, as a female. She presents herself to the world in that way. She calls herself that. I am going to respect that. It is not for me to say, but you were born as a biological male and therefore that he is going to linger over your head for the rest of your life. That is unacceptable. It is rude. Let's move on. The next point that I want to talk about is this idea that this is a choice. This is a topic that I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on because frankly I think it's so ludicrous to assume that something like being transgender or being homosexual is a choice that I don't really want to give that much attention to it. These are rooted in biology. There is some evidence that early childhood experience may have an impact as well, but at its core, these are biological things and they are recognized by medical professionals as being legitimate medical things. I don't want to say conditions because it's not a condition, it's a state of being. To suggest that being transgender is a choice, I think it takes away from the importance of what this really means. So just as you viewing may know in your core that you are a male or a female, so too do transgender people. It's just that for them it does not align with their biological anatomy. How is that any more worthy or less worthy than people who are cisgender? If you're not familiar with cisgender, it means that your identity and your biology happen to line up. And on the other hand, if it is a choice, which I vehemently deny that it is, but if it is a choice, what does it matter? Why are we not respecting that choice and accepting it for what it is? These are choices that don't harm other people. I don't know how to express myself in this regard. I really don't. I'm trying and I'm failing miserably, but I just can't see this being a choice that somebody would actively make. It's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's simply that there is so much negativity, as we've seen in the response to Nikkie's video. I mean, there's vast majority is positive, but there are still at least 100 and some thousand people who have taken the time out of their day to watch and thumbs down her video and then take to the comment section of her video and others and Twitter and God only knows where else to voice their concern about her lifestyle choice. There's so much scrutiny involved with being transgender that I can't imagine anybody volunteering to take that on, especially with an audience as big as Nikkie's. I just cannot accept that it's a choice. What is a choice, however, is how we react to others and how we express ourselves. And if we choose to do so in a transphobic, rude, ignorant, terrible way, that is what I think we should be judging, not somebody's gender and how they identify. So the third thing that I want to touch on then is this idea that God makes no mistakes. We're going to set aside the question of whether or not God actually exists, and if he or she does, which God is the correct God to be following. That's a topic for a whole other conversation. But I always find it fascinating that the seemingly most judgmental people often rely on religion and Bible teachings to justify their strong and often bigoted response to people. And I find that particularly amusing considering the Golden Rule is set out in the New Testament. And if you're not familiar with the Golden Rule, you can find it at Matthew 7:12. And it simply states, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Or in other words, treat people how you want to be treated. And really that is the crux of the New Testament. And that is what is so very often ignored or just blatantly overlooked. So here's the thing. I don't subscribe to the idea that God plays any role in this conversation, but I'm going to go with the flow on this one, and we're going to assume that God is in fact real and that God does not make any mistakes. And we're going to play it out a little bit further and see if this line of argument holds up. because we don't get to pick and choose which mistakes are overlooked or not. And let's define mistake before we move on. A mistake, let me get this right, a mistake means an action or judgment that is wrong. I could go further to define wrong, but I think we all get the idea of it. But also wrong tends to be rather subjective, does it not? Just putting that out there. All right, God makes no mistakes. God created the person who created the technology to do the surgeries to reassign sex. Therefore, reassigning sex is not a mistake. Do you see where the logic comes there? And if we're going to keep the same energy, let's look at different sorts of mistakes. Let's look at heart defects. There are children, babies in utero, who have heart surgery because there is an identifiable mistake in their anatomy. Are we to say then that we should not be performing those life-saving surgeries simply because God makes no mistakes? There are any number of examples that I could give to support my opposition to this line of reasoning, but I think the point is made. When you take this extremely narrow view that the people who say, but God makes no mistakes, would prefer us to take on this and expand it beyond just a laser focus on transgender people, it falls apart. And if it falls apart for other people, then it necessarily has to fall apart for transgender people as well. So maybe God makes no mistakes, but being transgender is not a mistake. Now, the next topic that I want to address is the one that comes up in both of the tweets that I read and seems to be the pervasive response amongst those who are having a negative response to the video. And that is this accusation that Nikki has lied or has otherwise misled people. By definition, a lie is a knowingly false statement. As far as I have seen, and as far as I am aware, there has been no knowingly false statement. There has simply been a lack of statements. And that, I think, is fair enough because none of us are entitled to this level of personal information from any of the people that we watch. And when people accuse Nikki of lying, do they expect that at the beginning of every video she's simply going to say, hey guys, it's Nikki. FYI, in case it changes your opinion on anything, I was born a male, but I transitioned to a woman. I live my life as a woman. I view myself as a woman. Okay, so on to today's review of this concealer. That is ludicrous. And again, it's information that does not matter. It doesn't matter. Now, again, I like analogies and I like to try certain types of logic against different scenarios to see if they still hold up, just like I did with the God makes no mistakes. So let's say Nikki had alopecia and she wore wigs. Are we then going to accuse her of lying if in one video she reveals that she actually has no hair because of her condition, because of her medical condition? And again, I'm using the word condition. I don't view being transgender as a condition. I just don't know what word to apply here. And if you have suggestions on what word would apply rather than condition, please let me know in the comments down below because I don't want to be unintentionally offensive. Regardless, go with me on this. If she has alopecia, which is outside of her control, and she's wearing a wig because that makes her feel more confident in herself, who is it harming? And why would there be this demand that she tells everybody? And why would we be accusing her of lying because she's worn a wig for the 11 years that we've watched her on YouTube? Same holds true with transgender. She transitioned to a female. She has lived her life as a female from a very young age, according to her video. She feels inside that she is a female. She identifies with being a female and she lives her life like a female. Where is the lie? And in my opinion, the people who are accusing her of lying are really just showing their transphobic sides because nothing has changed. It is still the same person, the same personality, the same creativity, the same talent. Everything is the same. The only thing that has changed because of that video is that we now know that NikkieTutorials was born biologically a male. That is the only thing that has changed. So, and I'm going to touch on that again as we go through the rest of my analysis, but if that is the only thing that has changed, and if people are having a negative reaction to her video, to the fact that she is transgender, then the only variable that they have an issue with is her being transgender. And I believe that that is the very definition of transphobia. Now, let's put a pin in that one for just one moment. And I had to bring up that first comment again so that I can get the quotation right. So this person says, so many people make up all this crap to try and make things acceptable to society, like the word transgender. You're a male or a female who had plastic surgery. We do not get to create a name for that to make it acceptable by society and shove it down others' throats. Okay, so there's a phrase that I like to say, and it is, you can't suck and blow. And basically, it boils down to you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. So on the one hand, if you're accusing her of lying and of withholding this information, and then turn around and also say, but she's shoving it down our throats, those two things are mutually exclusive. You can't be keeping something a secret and shove it down their throats at the same time. You see where I'm having a problem with this? So the idea of somebody sitting down and being incredibly vulnerable, yet being incredibly well-spoken and heartfelt while addressing, as of today, 31 million people, and sharing such a deep and personal truth about themselves, and then being accused of them shoving it down their throat, that doesn't jive. That doesn't make an awful lot of sense. When I think of somebody shoving something down my throat, it's telling me repeatedly why I should do something or why that is the best option or the only choice. Sharing that you were born a different biological sex than how you've portrayed yourself throughout most of your life and all of your adult life, that is not shoving anything down anybody's throats. That would be the same as me coming out and saying, hey, I was born in Burlington, Ontario. I'm not saying that everybody should be born there. I'm not saying that it's the best place to be born. I'm just simply stating, hey, here's a random fact that you might not know about me. And I get that that is nowhere on the same level as what Nikki shared, but again, let's just expand the logic and see if it still holds through, and it does not in this situation. All right, let us move on. So this person who is accusing Nikki of shoving stuff down our throats is also saying that she only became successful, essentially, because she presented herself as a woman. And I think that's just so disrespectful, not only to NikkieTutorials, but to women everywhere who have achieved any level of success, because we have not achieved it simply by virtue of being a female. There's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of determination, there's a lot of picking yourself back up when you've made a mistake or you've fallen. There's, in Nikki's case, an abundance of talent and creativity. I cannot accept that all of her success in life comes down to simply being a female. I am a female on the YouTube platform. I talk about makeup, I do tutorials. My skill, nowhere near Nikki's. I can completely own that. But if we're going to apply this logic, as a female, sitting in front of a camera, can I just expect then that accolades and money are going to come rolling in? No, because there is so much more to it than just being a female. And this person also goes on further in their comment to state that she's watched Nikki for years. So what's the problem then? Again, the only variable that's changed is that you now know what was between her legs when she was born. That's the only variable that's changed. So were you watching her just because she was a woman? What kept you coming back for years? It wasn't just that she was a woman. You liked her personality, you liked the way she talked about things, you liked her style, you liked her talent, you appreciated her creativity. You weren't simply subscribing because there was a woman in the thumbnail picture. So this logic also fails. Now there is one more thing from this first comment that I want to talk about, but I'm going to save it to the end. And right now we're going to switch over to that second tweet and talk about that a little bit. In particular, we're going to start off by talking about she is not a real woman. I defy anybody to narrow down the exact definition of what a real woman is, because it's so subjective and it depends on so many variables, including what your own personal feelings on gender roles is. In my own personal life, I went back to work after my children were born, after just a few months off, and my husband took a year of paternity leave. Traditionally speaking, it has been the women who stay home with the children. So does that mean that I'm less of a woman because I didn't take advantage of maternity leave? Does it mean that my husband is less of a man because he did? In my eyes, no. We're both parents. We both cared for our children. We made the decision that was best for our family at that time. If a man paints his fingernails, does that mean that he's now a woman? If a woman wears pants, is she now a man? There are so many factors involved that I think it's a ridiculous statement to say that anybody is not a real man or a real woman. And again, the use of air quotes around she, let's not do that. I don't even have anything eloquent to say about that, but just, it's so disrespectful that let's just not do that, please. In order to assist me in this conversation about what is a real woman, I actually went to the dictionary and looked up what it is that a woman is defined as. And there's a whole variety of things in there, but one of the commentary items on dictionary.com, if we're being specific, was that it is somebody who is born biologically a woman, i.e., capable of producing offspring. So if somebody has fertility issues, does that make them less of a woman then? Surely not. And regardless of what this person put in their tweet saying that real women can suffer infertility, by very definition, no, real woman can't. A real woman has to be able to give birth in order to fit this very narrow definition of what a woman is, if we're looking strictly from a biological perspective. So clearly it's not just biology that determines whether somebody's a woman or a man. There are so many more societal factors and psychological factors involved. So for anybody to say that somebody's a real man or a real woman, that's taking on an awful lot of responsibility to make those determinations on behalf of other people. You have no idea how they feel. You have no idea what their gender identity is except for what they show you and what they present to the outside world. And if we're going to go with that, well, Nikkie's never presented herself as anything other than a woman on her YouTube channel. So yes, she is a woman. I don't understand where this disconnect lies. If she's transitioned as a woman, she considers herself to be a woman, she feels like she's a woman, she lives like a woman, she presents herself to the world as a woman, guess what? She's a woman. And we don't need to put a qualifier around that. We don't need to say, well, she's sort of a woman, or she's a real woman, or she's an artificial woman. No, she's a woman, full stop, period, that's it. And more than that, she's Nikkie. As she said in her video, I'm Kara, and that is more than just my gender. There's a lot more encompassing us than just what our gender is. That is just one factor in a sea of many. And arguably one of the least important factors, to be honest. I mean, I would rather know about somebody's personality than I would about what they were born as. And I feel like that's what it should be. And if we're going to judge people, we should be judging them on their actions and their convictions rather than their biological sex versus their gender identity. It's just so ridiculous to me. And speaking of ridiculous, let's move on to the statement of, I was deeply hurt when she called herself a real woman. I just simply counter that with why? Why would you be deeply hurt by that? What does it impact you in any way? It doesn't. It has literally no impact on your life. You could continue to watch her videos for the next 10 years, and it would never impact you, except that you won't. And you say that you won't because you won't support her. I'm going to tie in 2 points into one here because that was a separate point, but it's just organically come up. That you love her, but you don't support her. Well, if you don't support her, I don't think you love her. So saying something like that is really just trying to insulate a transphobic comment and trying to create a barrier and a buffer so that people don't criticize you for the earlier comment. Because the only time that I can think that you can honestly sit in front of somebody and say, I love you, but I don't support you, is when you're intervening in a truly self-harm kind of situation. So somebody who is going through substance abuse and you're saying, I love you, but I can no longer support this behavior and I won't be enabling it. You don't get to do that when it's something like, oh, I just found out after 11 years that you were born a male, but you've lived a female for like the last 20. No, I love you, but that's going to be a hard pass for me. No, that's a you problem. That's not a them problem. So being hurt by something like that just does not make sense to me because it doesn't detract from you in any way at all. And there's nothing threatening about that to your own femininity or womanhood. Let's do something here. And this is not going to be anything new or wildly revolutionary, but just let me get my kicks, okay? Let's just grab ye old candle here. So we're going to call this candle Nikki. We're going to call this lighter the tweeter. The flame is the tweeter's womanhood. So Nikki feels she's a woman, transitions into being a woman. So even if she directly took it from the tweeter, amazingly enough, the flames are still the same. This one, no duller. This one, no brighter. They're the same. Sorry to blow your flame out, Nikki, but thank you for providing an analogy for me. So to be deeply hurt by something as inconsequential as somebody else's gender speaks more to you than it does to her. And that brings me to my last point, and we're going to go back to the first comment that I read. And I just want to bring it up again because the question was very simple, but I want to make sure that I am nailing it completely. It said, basically her transgender status should have been something that was stated from the get-go. If transgender people don't think there is anything wrong with it, why do they hide it? And following that, there are 6 question marks. I can't imagine that anybody is truly mystified as to why transgender people don't just like use that as their opening comment in any social interaction. It's such a ludicrous statement, like it's such a ridiculous question that I don't even want to talk about it, but we're going to. There is a 28% increased risk of violence simply because somebody is transgender. And that is a number that I did not make up. That is a number that I got from the Human Rights Campaign. And it applies to the US, but I would imagine, and I'm quite confident in saying that there's an elevated risk of violence to transgender people worldwide, and probably higher in some countries than here. So not only is there a fear of physical violence, but people who are transgender and happen to be 15, 16, 17, still in high school, not financially independent. There's also this fear of telling their parents and perhaps getting kicked out of the home. Crazier things have happened. And so there's also this elevated risk of living in poverty and the risks that are associated along with that as well. So I think we're beginning to understand why people don't lead with this information. And aside from those, let's go back to my earlier comments in that we're not entitled to know this information. It's not pertinent to our interactions with anybody. And to put ourselves in her partner's shoes, we don't need to do that. She only has one partner. In a world of 7 billion people, there is one person who that could have an impact on, and only because she biologically cannot produce children. So we don't need to concern ourselves about when she may or may not have informed her partner of this. And I can completely understand why she didn't lead with that information with a partner. I can only imagine how difficult that is. But we don't need to concern ourselves with that. Let's take it back to the violence, because I think that is the obvious reason why there is such a hesitation for transgender people to make their transgender identity known. In the US in 2018, 26 people died as a result of fatal violence simply because they are transgender. Interesting side note, the majority of those were Black transgender women, so there is an intersection of transphobia and racism as well. In 2019, at the time the article was written that I found these statistics in, 25 people had been murdered because they were transgender. In the description box down below, I'm going to link to a Wikipedia site which has the names of victims worldwide throughout the past, I can't remember, 20 years or so. And keep in mind that many of these incidents are not reported. And these are simply the fatalities. How many other instances are there where people are severely injured or not severely injured but attacked nonetheless, that go unreported or that don't make it onto this list? The risk of violence is real. And to think that you're somehow entitled to this information, that people could literally die from sharing. Again, this is a you problem. And it's not a problem that needs to be solved, and it's not a problem that you get to demand a response to. And on that note, I'm going to wrap this video up here. All I want to say is that to anybody who has ever shared their transgender identity, I have the utmost respect for you. And to do that on a platform where 31 million people have watched, I can't imagine sharing anything, like anything, with that many people. So my hat is off to NikkieTutorials. And for my part, my view of her has only been elevated by this. Not because she's transgender, but because she had the strength to reclaim her power and to share that in the manner in which she did. And to the person or people who felt that they had the right to blackmail her and threaten her, if you didn't get a chance to have a seat with Nikkie, feel free to have a seat with me. All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I look forward to reading your comments, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now.